what the media in the West often call Russia's newly found assertiveness. Why are you against using this term?
Well, on the subject of the Georgian war, as I've pointed out again and again and again, there was absolutely nothing new in Russia's position. Russia's commitment to South Ossetia began under Mikhail Gorbachev. Russia's commitment to Abkhazia began under Boris Yeltsin. Russia has repeatedly made clear that if Georgia attacked either of these places, Russia would fight. And indeed, it's shown this on smaller incidents previously. There's this nonsensical line in the West that Russia set a trap for Georgia. There was no trap, there was a hole in plain sight. Russia dug it, showed it to the Georgians, said, you want to step forward, you will fall into this hole. Georgia stepped forward and fell into the hole. But as I say, this would have happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Well, it did happen 15 years ago, 5 years ago. There's nothing new in that. This is a long-standing Russian position. Now, whether Moscow should have adopted this position in the first place is a different question, but it says nothing about new Russian assertiveness. And indeed, more widely as well, Russia is reacting on the whole, not always, but on the whole. Most of Russia's actions are reacting to something that the West or the United States is doing. Russia did not choose of its own accord to move missiles into Kaliningrad. It is doing it, or threatening to do it, in response to the American move of anti-missile forces into Eastern Europe. Russia, for that matter, did not of its own bat begin to put greater pressure on Ukraine in certain areas in recent years. It was a response to the threat of NATO expansion, and so on and so forth. Russia is reacting, on the whole, to what the West is doing. It isn't asserting new positions. You cannot see occasions where Russia has acted, for example, to overthrow the governments of neighbouring states. Russia is not pushing for a greater military role in the other states of the former Soviet Union. It's quite true, of course, that Russia is trying to maintain a certain degree of sphere of influence, but it's not adopting a kind of military or geopolitical expansionist policy.
Why do you believe the British and the US officials were so slow in acknowledging that Georgia, the fact which is now more widely accepted, committed war crimes in South Ossetia?
But Georgia is their ally. There's nothing new about the Americans defending their allies. If you think Georgia committed war crimes, good Lord, look at what some of America's allies in Central America and the Caribbean have done in terms of monstrosities over the years, and America has defended them because they're American client states. America in that way simply behaves very much as an old-fashioned imperial power. What
about the most recent revelations that we've had from the OSCE, that there were reports going through?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. But, reports go through, but are they forwarded to the desk of the Secretary of State or the British Foreign Secretary? Almost certainly not, if they go against the prevailing consensus. You damage your career that way. You are a junior official who receives this report, and you want to forward it, and you're told, no, this is not really the official line, and if I were you, I would be quiet about it. I think obviously happens all over the world, but we do call ourselves democracies in the West.
Do you think after the conflict Georgia has more or less chance of becoming a NATO member?
I think Georgia has zero chances of joining. Now the West knows that if it brings Georgia into NATO, it is committing itself, in all probability, to fighting for Georgia in a real war. Once things have calmed down a bit, all those Europeans and others who have absolutely no intention of fighting for Georgia will, I think, quietly make their voices heard, and this will simply... nobody is going to make an official statement that it's off the agenda, but it will gradually fade into insignificance over the years.
How much do you believe Georgia has undermined its sort of position, or rather its attitude with the Allies?
Well, the fact that the Allies are coming up with $4.5 billion in aid to Georgia shows that Georgia still does have many unconditional friends, though we have to see whether that money will actually be provided, of course. So often in the past we've seen great declarations about amounts of money and then only a fraction arrive. But I think from the point of view of security commitments to Georgia, Georgia has done itself terrible damage.
Well, you say that Georgia has strongly undermined its chances, but do you still believe that NATO will be prepared to clash or confront Russia over Georgia's membership action plan?
It depends what one means by clash. The point is that as Georgia has dramatised, clash may no longer mean, very serious arguments and diplomatic unpleasantness. It can mean war. NATO is not prepared to go to war. How far it will be prepared to risk serious international crisis, I'm not quite sure. Frankly, I was astonished that they went as far as they did, given the problems that NATO is facing in Afghanistan and that America is facing in Iraq. Add to that now the world economic crisis.
Is there a gap between the American and European attitude towards Georgia and Ukraine?
Well, there's a very big gap, of course, between America on the one hand and France, Germany, Italy and Spain, the big West European countries. On the other hand, I mean, one of the reasons why America is pushing this is the influence of the East European lobbies. So America is very close to the Balts, Poland, to a lesser extent the Czech Republic and Hungary. And Britain, as usual, is footling around somewhere in the middle, trying to be the leader of the East Europeans within Europe and always, of course, trying to be close to America, while at the same time acting as some kind of brake and moderating force.
Obama is very popular in Europe. Are we likely to see the new relationship between the United States and Europe?
No. I think, basically. You'll see a much warmer set of atmospherics. And on certain issues, you could see greater cooperation, much greater cooperation on the environment, for example. But as soon as Obama comes to Europe and starts asking for many more European troops for Afghanistan, for example, I mean, people may make promises, but it isn't going to happen. On NATO expansion, well, we have to see whether Obama will push NATO expansion, as Bush has done. I mean, I hope that his, what seems to be his innate calmness and a degree of caution will lead to him backing away from this. But one can't be sure. There is certainly a question, however, if Obama chooses to use his charm with Europe to push further NATO expansion, then that could be very dangerous. Very dangerous indeed. But I hope he will exercise his charm in other areas.
Well, they say that his attitude towards Russia will be really formed by his team, which is not exactly pro-Russian. What are your predictions for Obama-Russian relationship?
Well, I think that there are two forces pushing against each other in Washington, and we have to see which comes out on top. Obviously, I mean, pushing for a much harsher policy towards Russia is frankly most of the policy elite, backed by important forces in US society. And yes, I mean, the names who it seems Obama is likely to appoint are certainly no friends of Russia. On the other hand, pushing against an aggressive policy are the fact that the United States has no troops and no money. And Obama is going to be told, I hope firmly, by the US military, that he simply mustn't make any more military commitments that the US can't meet. If further NATO enlargement also requires a lot more money, which of course it may not. I mean, that's why, in one way, NATO enlargement is so dangerous, because it's cheap. EU enlargement requires a lot of money, so it has to go in a slow and measured fashion, whereas, NATO membership is essentially just a declaration. So I hope, that to put it at its bluntest, the growing weakness of the United States will stop it from doing, more really reckless things.
And finally, Anatol, your take on Russia is, let's put it, a little bit unusual for somebody who has been working in the United States and lives in Britain. While you're trying to explain Russia's actions, you're often accused of defending Russia against its critics. Why have you chosen this path?
I know a lot about Western history. Nobody who knows a good deal about the history of the United States, or indeed Western Europe, is going to take a very high moral line in dealing with other countries. I also understand, as a student of empire, just how damnably difficult it is to rule over areas like the Caucasus, or to border on areas like the Southern Caucasus and Central Asia. You know, countries who have such borders, who have territories like Chechnya, Dagestan and so forth, you know, simply cannot run themselves as if they were Luxembourg or Denmark.